The sound that woke him wasn't a scream. Screams he knew, he'd heard them in movies, in nightmares, echoing up stairwells in city apartments when couples forgot the walls were thin. This wasn't that. This was the sound a throat makes when it remembers it can do more than speak. It slid under the honeymoon suite's bathroom door as a ragged whine climbed into a broken sob and ended on something that didn't sound human at all. Out here, folks don't whisper their legends to scare children, they whisper them to stay alive. They pass them along in low voices in late hours, little threads of warning stitched into the dark around these hills. They've got a name for the stories that keep them up at night, whispering narratives, soft-spoken, autopsies of nights the moon refused to forget. Tonight's begins with that sound under the door. Evan Marrow stood barefoot, on cold tile, Tuck's shirt hanging open, wedding ring sticky with someone else's blood. The bathroom door rattled in its frame with every impact. Something too heavy to be her shoulder hit it, then dragged downward, nails gouging slow. Deliberate furrows into the wood. Evan, her voice came through in pieces, like it was being chewed while she spoke it. Don't open the door. The syllables warped at the edges, the way sound bends when it comes through water. A low growl undercut the words, rising and falling with her breathing. He could hear her pacing on the other side, claws actual cloth clicking and scraping across tile that matched his. The moonlight had finally broken through the storm, pooling silver across the floor like spilled mercury. It had crawled there, slowly, inch by inch, until it reached the base of the door. When it touched the threshold, the thing wearing his wife's voice threw its head back and howled. The door bowed inward. That was the moment everyone would argue about later. If anyone had the courage to speak at all, whether he should have run, or listened, or prayed, whether anything he did could have changed what the moon had already decided. Because in towns like this, no one survives the night it chooses. They just learn how to live with what's left of themselves afterward. Folks in towns like this don't whisper their legends to scare children. They whisper them to stay alive. They still whisper about the Mara wedding. Never loudly, never for long. You can tell when you find the right older face at the bar or the grocery or the chapel steps. Ask the wrong question and they'll shake their head and change the subject. Ask the right one and their eyes go distant, toward the ridge where the chapel clings to the hillside, and the muscles in their jaw give one small, traitorous twitch. The story always starts the same way, with a man who came from somewhere else and a woman who had never once left. Evan arrived in Win Hollow with the confidence of anyone who believes monsters belong on screens and not in family bloodlines. City-born, half-raised on horror movies, he'd joked once that if he ever heard a real howl under a full moon, he'd probably laugh first and record it second. Mary Elwyn didn't laugh when he said that. She just watched him like she was, cataloguing the exact shape of his throat when he swallowed. He thought she was shy, thought she was just quiet, careful, old-fashioned in a way he found oddly grounding. He liked the way she listened to him, the way she seemed to drink in every story he told about the city, about late trains and neon and noise. He liked the way her hand fit inside his, small but firm, like she'd already weathered storms he hadn't felt yet. He met her family last, after he'd already fallen too far to climb back out clean. The winds were carved from the same weathered wood as the chapel they attended. Her mother's hair was going silver in a way that didn't quite match the softness of her face. Her father had the stooped shoulders of someone who'd spent too long lifting things that didn't belong to this world. They were polite, kind, even, but there was an edge under everything they said. Like they were rehearsing lines they'd gone over too many times. They approved of the engagement quickly, too quickly. His own mother said over the phone, but he took it as proof that love was simple here, that old towns could still do something right. He noticed the first crack at the rehearsal dinner, The hall they'd rented next to the chapel had wood-paneled walls and old photographs of other weddings, nailed up crookedly. Relatives he'd never met pressed sweaty congratulations into his hand. Children chased each other between tables. The storm that would later hide the moon was already building, thunder growling somewhere beyond the mountains. When the main course came, he was too busy watching Mariel to care about the food. She'd always been pale, but there was a new sheen to her skin, like dew on stone. She pushed her vegetables around on the plate, ignoring the wine. Twice he caught her flinching when someone clinked a glass. Then the air in the room shifted. The storm outside seemed to lean in. Evan glanced toward the window and saw nothing but his own reflection and the suggestion of trees beyond. When he turned back, Marielle's fork had frozen halfway to her mouth. Her wrist trembled. For one heartbeat just, one her pupils narrowed into vertical slits, amber flooding the brown. "Ma?" he whispered. She blinked. The pupils rounded. The color softened. She set the fork down very carefully and stood up. "Excuse me," she said to the table, voice steady in a way her jaw wasn't. "I just need a moment." Her bridesmaids rose immediately, flanking her without a word. Her mother watched them, go with a look Evan didn't know how to name, something between grief and relief. He waited 5 minutes, then 10. Laughter and conversation washed over the emptiness in his chest. He forced himself to smile through 2 toasts. Every time the door to the hall opened, he half expected to see her there, framed in fluorescent light. When she did return, she smelled different. He couldn't explain it logically. He'd never been the type to talk about auras or energy, but something rode the air around her now. A sharp, metallic tang beneath her perfume, like rain hitting rust. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair clung damply to her neck. She'd lost the shoes. Bare feet padded silently across the floor. "Where'd you go?" he asked when she reached him, keeping his tone light. "Just needed air." She smiled, but it was a thing pulled onto her face, not grown there. "I got overwhelmed." He touched her shoulder. She flinched before she could stop herself. His fingers brushed skin that felt too hot. "Your pulse is crazy," he murmured. "Nerves." Her smile widened a fraction too much. "Tomorrow's a big day." Her bridesmaids hovered behind her, watching him with a quiet, measuring alertness. One of them her cousin. He thought whispered something in Mariel's ear. Mariel nodded, almost imperceptibly. Evan wanted to ask what was wrong. Wanted to demand the truth like someone tearing a bandage away. But love, for all its poetry, is a cowardly thing. It prefers assumptions that feel good over questions that might hurt. He kissed her temple instead. If he'd leaned half an inch closer, he might have heard the grinding strain of bone under skin. That night at the inn, the A, town's dogs wouldn't stop barking. The building was old enough that every footstep echoed down the narrow hallways. Rain beat against the windows in irregular bursts, blown by winds that seemed to come from every direction at once. Evan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled talk and laughter of relatives settling into their rooms. Then the barking started, not from one house, from all of them. A patchwork choir of panic, crescendos rising and falling in uneasy waves. Sometimes the sound drew close, as if the dogs were tearing at fences or doors. Sometimes it faded, as if they were backing away from something they didn't want to see. Once, just once, a howl cut through the barking. It wasn't the sound of any dog he'd ever heard. Too long, too low, it seemed to drag behind it the memory of other nights, other storms. It carried, not across the valley, but into it as if the hills themselves were hollow, and something old had just woken up inside. He sat up, heart pounding in his throat. The floorboards in the hallway creaked. Shadows slid under his door as people shifted in their sleep. No one called out. No one said, "Did you hear that?" The silence that followed the howl was worse than the sound itself. It was the silence of people who have already decided not to admit what they're living with. At breakfast, he tried to joke about it. "Rough night for the dogs," he said, buttering cold toast. Sounded like they were seeing ghosts. No one laughed. Marielle's father took a slow sip of coffee. A mother stirred her tea in tight circles, spoon clinking against porcelain like a nervous tick. Marielle watched him, eyes rimmed with fatigue, hands clasped too tightly around her mug. Probably just coyotes. Someone at the far end of the table muttered, "Wolves," corrected another. "Not wolves," said Marielle's mother sharply. The table went quiet. Evan opened his mouth, then closed it. The confusion must have shown on his face, because Marielle reached under the table and gripped his hand hard. "Don't listen to the hills," she said softly, almost apologetically. "They echo weird up here. It's nothing." Her palm was damp, her fingers were cold. He thought then just for a heartbeat about calling the whole thing off. Not because he didn't love her, but because he suddenly realized how much he didn't know about her family, about this place, about the stories no one would tell him. But he remembered the way she'd looked at him when he'd knelt with the ring. Remembered how her voice had trembled on the phone the first time he said "I love you." Remembered late nights, sharing secrets in parking lots and empty diners. You don't throw that away because the countryside knows how to howl. He squeezed her hand back. The chapel was older than the town around it. Evan had seen it in pictures when they'd planned the wedding, a picturesque stone building clinging to the mountainside, stained glass windows set like an eye above the main doors. In person, it felt different, smaller, somehow darker. Not haunted, exactly, but haunted by use, by repetition, by rituals that went on whether anyone believed in them or not. On the day of the ceremony, the storm clung to the horizon, dragging a bruise of clouds along the sky. The air outside the chapel tasted of wet stone and pine sap. Inside, candles burned in thick clusters, their wax pooling like melted bones. Old hymns played low on the organ. The world narrowed to aisle and altar, and the faint sense that the building itself was holding its breath. He didn't see Marielle until the doors opened. The first thing he noticed was the veil. It didn't hang so much as hover, lifting and falling in currents of air he couldn't feel. The second was the way she walked. Slow, careful, as if the distance between the doors and the altar wasn't a straight line, but a tightrope strung over something bottomless. Her dress was simple, vintage lace and silk that looked like it had seen other ceremonies. It hugged her too tightly at the ribs. He realized that when she breathed, the fabric strained, as if just one more inhale might split it. The third thing he noticed came a moment later, when the first dog barked. He wouldn't have heard it if the organist hadn't paused. The note hung in the air, then fell away. In the brief quiet, a bark echoed in from somewhere down in the town. Another answered it, then another. In seconds, the valley was full of it, again howls and barks and frantic, panicked noise. Mariel froze. Mid-dash-step, her bridesmaids pressed closer behind her. The priest glanced up at the stained glass window and muttered something in Latin under his breath. Then the organ resumed, louder, and the moment moved on, like a shadow, pretending it hadn't just passed through the room. By the time she reached him at the altar, the dogs had grown hoarse. He took her hands. They were as cold as the stone beneath their feet. Through the lace gloves, he felt the tremor running through her fingers. "Are you okay?" he whispered. "I'm getting married," she said, lips barely moving. "Of course I'm not okay." It was the closest to a joke she'd managed all morning. He smiled despite himself. For a moment, he let himself believe that whatever he'd felt all night, the unease, the wrongness, was just pre-weeding nerves. Then he saw the ribbon dotted lay, coiled on the altar between them, red, frayed at the edges, stained, darker in spots that might have been from years of use. The priest lifted it with ceremony, draping it over their joined wrists after the vows. It felt rough against his skin, almost sticky. When he glanced down, he thought he saw faint symbols burned into the fabric. Crescent shapes, claw marks, a circle divided by 3 lines. He opened his mouth to ask what it meant. The priest tightened the knot. "For as long as you both shall live," the old man said, voice breaking on the last word as if it had forced its way out. The storm outside shifted. Lightning flared for one thin second. White light seared through the stained glass and landed squarely on Marielle's face. Her pupils shrank to slits and glowed. He felt her flinch, felt something under her skin surge and slam itself against the inside of her ribs, like it wanted to get out. Her jaw clenched so hard he heard a small, sharp crack. "I do," she said, and there were 2 voices in it. One human, one older. He told himself he imagined it. People tell themselves a lot of things right before the world changes. The reception tried its best to be ordinary. There were speeches that ran too long, wine that ran out too quickly, kids that ran circles around tables until their parents hissed their names. String lights flickered under the eaves of the hall. The storm stayed at the edges of the sky, muttering. Mariel stayed away from the lights. Evan watched her drift from shadow to shadow, speaking briefly with guests, always returning to the same corner by the window where the glass showed only darkness beyond. Twice, when lightning flared distantly, he saw her straighten and stare as if someone had called her name. At dinner, she picked at her food, ignoring the champagne. When the staff brought out rare roast beef blood shimmering in the low light, she stiffened. He thought she looked repulsed at first. Then he saw the way her nostrils flared, the way her tongue swept unconsciously across her teeth. "Ma," he said under his breath when they were momentarily alone at the sweetheart table. "You haven't eaten?" "Not yet," she said. The way she said it made gooseflesh rise along his arms. Her cousin approached, placing a gentle hand on Marielle's shoulder. "We should check your makeup before the first dance," she said, but her eyes flicked to the window and everything else. "Already?" Marielle's voice held a thread of fear. "The clouds are thinning," her cousin replied. Evan glanced outside. He saw nothing but darkness and the occasional smear of lightning. But the air did feel different, lighter somehow, and colder. "I'll be right back," Mariel told him, cupping his cheek. Her fingers lingered a second too long, like she was memorizing the texture of his skin. "You okay?" he asked again. "If I'm not," she said quietly, "you'll know." She left with her cousin, dress whispering against the floor. Her mother watched them go with her lips, moving silently, as if praying or reciting something. Her father found reasons to refill people's drinks every time anyone glanced toward the door. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Evan's stomach knotted. The music blurred into meaningless background noise. He stood up once, twice, each time interrupted by someone wanting a photo, a handshake, a story. By the time he broke free, his heart was hammering hard, enough to make him lightheaded. He found the side door propped open, wind pushing in smell of wet leaves, followed the muddy flagstones around the hall. The storm grumbled overhead. The hills lurked as darker shapes behind the chapel. He saw the torn piece of veil first. It hung from a thorn bush pale against the dark, fluttering like a trapped bird. As he stepped closer, another gust of wind peeled it free. It drifted too. The ground at his feet ripped along the edge in a way that didn't look like a snag. The path wound past the chapel toward the graveyard. where old stones leaned at odd angles like they were listening. He saw movement, their white against shadow, flicker of lace and skin. "Marielle," he called. The figure flinched. He stepped carefully between stones slick with moss. Names blurred by time stared up at him. The wind smelled stronger here, wild, heavy with something like iron and wet fur. He found her kneeling at the base of a weather-worn statue, dress clinging to her like a second skin. Her hands were buried in the mud up to the wrists. Her hair hung around her face, hiding it. Her shoulders shook in uneven jerks. "Ma," he said, softer now. "Hey, talk to me." She turned her head. Her eyes weren't brown anymore. They burned, gold, pupils, thin slices of darkness. The whites were traced with a spiderweb of red. Mud streaked her cheeks. Her lips were bloody, bitten through in places. "Don't come closer," she rasped. Her voice sounded wrong, deeper at the edges, like there were more chords vibrating than her body had been built with. "You're freezing," he said, taking another step anyway. "You're going to get sick. Let's just go inside. We'll figure it's not a cold," she'll cut in. "It's the moon." Lightning flickered behind the rim of clouds, backlighting them. For an instant, he saw the full curve of it above the ridge, veiled but there. Even half hidden, its pull crawled along his skin in a way he didn't have a word for. "What are you talking about?" he whispered. She laughed once. It broke in the middle like something snapped. "I wanted to tell you before," she said, "so many times. But if I told you, you wouldn't have stayed. And if you didn't stay," her fingers clawed deeper into the mud. The earth resisted, then yielded. "If you didn't stay, I wouldn't have had anyone to hold me back." Her shoulders spasmed. The sound that came out of her chest was halfway, between a groan and a growl. The dress, already damp and dirty, stretched dangerously across her ribs. "It's too soon," she gasped. "The clouds weren't supposed to break until dawn. We timed it. We planned it." Another spasm cut her off, her back arched. He heard the dry pop of vertebrae shifting. "Marielle." He dropped to his knees in front of her, reaching for her arms. Her muscles bunched like coiled steel under his fingers. Her skin burned. "Let go," she snarled, and the snarl wasn't metaphor. Her lip curled, revealing teeth that were longer than they had been this morning. "If you love me, let go. If you don't, I'll tear you apart." He almost laughed, because it sounded like a joke, like something couples say when they pretend to argue. But there was no humor in her eyes, now only fear, and something behind the fear pressing forward. "You're scaring me," he whispered. "I'm scared," she hissed back. "You should be running, Evan. You should be miles away by now. But you had to come find me. You couldn't leave it alone." Thunder rolled like distant applause. She wrenched herself free and staggered to her feet. For a moment she hunched there, silhouetted against the chapel, veil scraps flapping from her hair, breath coming in ragged, snarling bursts. Then the clouds broke, moonlight crashed over the ridge like a tide. It hit her full on. Her head snapped back, mouth opening in a soundless scream. Her fingers snapped backward with a wet crunch, then regrew in new directions. Nails blackened, lengthened, becoming curved claws. Fur erupted along her arms in a rush that sounded almost like applause. Evan stumbled backward, landing hard against a gravestone. The stone was slick. His hand slid through moss, left streaks where his nails dug in. "Marielle," he choked. "Stop, please. This is me stopping," she growled. Her jaw cracked wider. Skin split along her cheeks as bone pushed outward. Teeth lengthened, overlapping into a predator's mouth. Her eyes were no longer fully human, not in shape or in hunger, but they stayed on him, clung to him like an anchor. "This is what I was trying to save you from," she forced out around the changing architecture of her face. "This is why you had to stay." Her spine bowed, her ribs expanded, lace shredding along each new contour. The dress gave up with a ripping sigh, tatters hanging from her as fur consumed the rest. Her shoulders broadened, tendons snapping and thickening. Hansno, paws, now hit the ground in front of him, claws carving deep furrows into the soil. He watched in helpless horror as the woman he'd proposed to at a candlelit table in a downtown restaurant was peeled away piece by piece, replaced by something old and furious and terribly alive. There was no neat fad tube lat, no tasteful cutaway. Every second of it was their bones sliding under skin, muscles reforming, vertebrae stacking into a new curve built for running and killing and leaping. By the time the moon finished its work, the thing crouched before him, towered over him on all fours. Black fur rippled along her back like shadows in motion. Her muzzle dripped saliva onto the stone. Her ears pricked forward, then flattened. The gold in her eyes burned hotter. He didn't scream. Later, he would wonder why. Maybe the brain only has room for one instinct at a time, and his chose something older than fear, recognition. "Mariel," he whispered again, not sure who he was hoping to reach. The wolf, his bride, his monster. His curse bared her teeth. She lunged not at his throat, not at his chest, past him. Something had been slinking between the graves behind him. He hadn't noticed it over the sound of his own pulse. A shape trying to take advantage of his distraction. When the wolf collided with it, teeth flashing, he caught the brief glimpse of a long, lean shape, grey fur, yellow eyes burning with a hunger that wasn't human, but wasn't hers either. They hit the ground in a tangle of snarls and fur. The smaller creature yelped, twisted, tried to escape. She pinned it, jaws closing over its neck. There was a wet tearing sound. The thing spasmed, then went limp. She stood over it, chest heaving. Blood darkened the fur around her mouth. Steam rose from her body into the cold air. Slowly, she turned back toward him. Then the chapel bell rang. He hadn't heard anyone approach, hadn't heard the door creak open. But suddenly there were people, their shadows, in the periphery, figures, holding lanterns and old iron chains. Faces he recognized from the pews now changed by fear and grim determination. "Mariel," her father called, voice cracking, inside now. The wolf's ears twitched. For a moment, her muscles quivered like she might bolt. Instead, with a low, rumbling snarl, she padded carefully around Evan, giving him a wide berth, and stalked toward the chapel. On the steps, she paused, turned her head one last time to look at him. In that glance, he saw everything the transformation hadn't taken. The girl who'd let him teach her how to parallel park. The woman who'd cried into his neck when her grandmother died. The bride who'd whispered yes against his lips. Then she slipped inside. Hands pulled Evan up, crowding him with questions he couldn't answer. "Did she bite you? Did she touch you? Did you bleed?" He stared at his arms, his chest, his hands. Mud, blood, scratches from falling, but no wounds that matched the crescent of her teeth. Her mother's shoulders sagged in relief. "We're not too late," she said. "Too late for what?" he demanded, voice raw. They didn't answer. He heard chains clink inside the chapel, heard guttural snarls, screams that weren't quite human and weren't quite gone, heard prayers, spoken in voices that shook, and commands barked in tones that had practiced them too many times. "Come on," her father said, steering him toward the side door. "We don't have long before she forgets everything but the scent of what she loves." They took him back to the hall. tried to pit warmth and light and cheat music against the sound of his wife tearing herself against her bonds somewhere above them. Guests whispered rumors over half-finished plates. Some had seen more than others. A handful slipped away under cover of concern, bags hastily packed, deciding that whatever debt tied them to the Wynn family wasn't strong enough to withstand this storm. No one called the police. He noticed that much. When he tried to go back to the chapel, her cousin blocked the door. "You'll die if you see her like this," she said. "Or worse, you'll live and wish you hadn't." "I just watched her turn into a Wynn," the cousin said softly. "This is what we are. What we've been since before there was a chapel here to pretend otherwise." Lightning flashed again, framing the church in white. "You married into it," she continued, eyes shining with a complicated kind of pity. "You said the vows, you wore the ribbon. You stood where we told you to stand." "I didn't know what I was agreeing to," he whispered. "Neither did any of us the first time." Her gaze slid to the graveyard on the hill. "Ask the stones. They remember." The night dragged itself forward by inches. At some point, the music stopped. The staff went home. Only a small core of family remained, sitting in tight knots, flinching at every distant crash or howl from the chapel. Evan sat alone at the sweetheart table, staring at the half-empty champagne flutes, trying to reconcile the woman who'd practiced signing his last name with the creature he'd seen ripping another predator's throat out. At some point he realized the howling had stopped. Silence settled heavy over the valley. "It's almost dawn," Marielle's mother said, standing. Her face looked years older than it had that morning. "She'll be weak now. We have to move her before the next cycle." The next cycle. The words ran chill fingers up his spine. He followed them back to the chapel despite their protests. The door was unlocked now. The air inside was hot, humid with breath and fear and animal panic that had slowly worn itself out. They found her in the side chamber, where confessions were usually murmured. Chains circled the stone pillar in the center of the room. Some lay snapped on the floor, others still wrapped around the figure, slumped against the base. She was human again. Mostly, her hair stuck to her face in damp clumps. Her skin was mottled with bruises and smeared with blood, some hers, some not. Faint fur still blurred at the edges of her arms like ghosted shadows. Her fingers, though human-shaped, ended in nails that hadn't quite remembered where to stop. When she heard Evan's footsteps, her head jerked up. Terror flared first in her eyes, then shame, then a tired, brittle kind of resignation. "You weren't supposed to see me," she whispered. He knelt regardless, reaching for her. Her mother hissed something behind him, but didn't stop him. This time, "You attacked something," he said. "Out there, behind me, came to feed on the fear," she rasped. "They always do on nights like this. The moon pulls more than just us. I smelled it. Couldn't let it have you. You saved my life," he said. "I endangered it first." Her eyes dropped to his hand. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head. "I don't think so. They checked me." She swallowed. A tear slid down her mud-streaked cheek. "Then we got lucky," she said. "The first night always calls hardest. It's when we're most likely to take first night." His voice went thin. Her father cleared his throat. "The curse binds on vows," he said. "On contracts, promises, covenants. Marriage is one of the strongest. For our kind, it's a pressure point." "Our kind," Evan repeated numbly. "You married into the blood," her father said. "It recognizes you now. You'll always be a part of it. But only a bite passes the full change. Has anyone ever resisted it?" Evan asked, looking back at Marielle. She laughed humorlessly. You saw me fight. Did it look like resisting worked? You fought for him, her mother said quietly. That's more than some did. The room felt too small, the air too thick. Evan's heart beat a stuttering rhythm against the inside of his ribs. How many? He asked. Her cousin sighed. You're asking how many grooms didn't make it to dawn? He nodded. Double quotes enough that we changed the way we do weddings, she said. Enough that we set the dates to storms, to cloud cover, to any trick we can use to blunt the moon. Enough that we keep iron in the walls of the chapel and chains blessed and ready. He thought of the ribbon, of the way it had bitten into his skin. If I'd refused the vows, he said slowly, would it have changed anything? Mariel's gaze sharpened. You think the moon cares about contract law? She asked. It would have taken me either way. The vows were for you, to keep you close, to make it so I'd fight. He sank down beside her, ignoring the wetness seeping into his clothes. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. I tried. She closed her eyes. Every time I said my family's complicated, or the town's weird about the woods, or I get strange when I'm tired, that was me trying. But how do you look someone you love in the face and say, by the way, on our wedding night I might grow claws and forget your name? You didn't forget, he said. You went around me. You attacked what was hunting me. For now, her jaw clenched. The next cycle, I might not get that choice. He thought of leaving, truly thought of it, for the first time. Not as a dramatic gesture, but as a quiet, practical line he could walk, pack a suitcase, drive out before the next full moon, pretend this place was just a bad dream. She must have read it on his face. If you go, she said, voice almost too soft to hear, you'll be safer for a while, until someone like me finds someone like you somewhere else, and it all starts again. That's how this works. We spread, not just through bites, but through memory, through stories, through the way fear smells when it's fresh. He looked down at his hand. There, just below the thumb, was a crescent of bruises he hadn't noticed before. Not punctures, not broken skin, just the shadow of teeth pressed hard enough to leave the shape of them without drawing blood. She followed his gaze and flinched. I didn't mean to, she whispered. I just needed to mark you so I could find you in the dark. He flexed his fingers. The bruises throbbed dully. For a moment, a phantom ache shimmered through his jaw, like his teeth didn't quite fit anymore. What happens now? He asked now. Her father exhaled slowly. Now we clean the blood, patch the walls, put the chains away, pretend to the town that the power outage ruined the reception, and send half-truths in thank you cards. And after that, Evan pressed. After that, you decide, Mariel said. You stay and learn the rules, or you go and learn different ones. Either way, the moon will remember your face. He thought of their apartment in the city, still waiting, of the couch they'd picked out together, the mugs, the framed prints, the life that had seemed so solid and normal, now revealed as fragile veneer over something a lot older and less interested in his career path. He also thought of the graveyard, of the way she'd thrown herself at another monster instead of at him, of the way her eyes had found him through pain that should have broken her mind along with her bones. I promised in sickness and in health, he said hoarsely. This isn't sickness, she replied. This is inheritance. You don't owe it anything. Or me. That's not how promises work, he said. Dawn broke while they argued with themselves. Light seeped through the stained glass window in soft bands, painting her in colors that had nothing to do with blood. She shivered as the last remnants of the night bled out of her. At some point, she fell asleep against the pillar. He didn't leave, not that day, not that week. They postponed the honeymoon. sent polite lies to relatives, politely lied to themselves in smaller ways. He helped her cover the claw marks in the bathroom with a new door, helped her family patch the chapel wall where she'd broken through once years before. A scar he hadn't noticed during the first tour. The first time full moon came around. Again, he tried to pretend he'd forgotten. The dogs didn't. Their barking started early this time. The air hummed with a nervous electricity. Clouds thickened, then thinned, then thickened again, like the sky couldn't make up its mind whether mercy was on the schedule. As dusk seeped into the valley, Marielle paced the length of their bedroom, wearing the old chains like jewelry. "I could go to a hotel in the city," he said. "Check into the top floor, somewhere bright, somewhere crowded." She shook her head. "You think distance dilutes the pull?" she asked. "If I lose myself and smell you half a state away, I'll get there. It'll just take me longer, and I'll be hungrier." He didn't like the way she said hungrier, like it was an objective fact, not a confession. "So I stay," he said. "You stay away from me," she corrected. "When it starts, you lock the door. You don't open it no matter what you hear. Not if I cry, not if I laugh, not if I say your name in a voice that sounds exactly like mine. And if something else comes?" he asked, like the thing at the graveyard. Her eyes went distant. "Then you hope the bigger monster remembers who it chose," she said. When the moon finally broke through the clouds, he was on the other side of the reinforced bedroom door, heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his tongue. The chain on the door rattled once when she tested it with human hands, twice when the hands weren't human anymore. The sounds she made that night crawled into parts of his brain that had never known sound before. Bones snapping, skin tearing, and the knitting back wrong. Growls that started low, then rose into maimed versions of the laugh he loved. He did not open the door, not when she begged, not when she cursed, not when she went suddenly, horribly quiet. The same moonlight that had painted her wedding dress silver now turned the crack under the door into a blade of light across the floor. He watched it the way others watched altars. Sometime past midnight, something else scratched along the outside wall of the house. Long, slow drags of claws, snuffling huffs, a wet sound like a tongue-tasting brick. He held his breath. On the other side of the door, his monster threw herself at the wall. They tore at each other in snarls and hisses and crashes that shook the room. Plaster rained lightly from the ceiling. He could hear them hitting furnishings, the hallway, the stairs. At one point, something slammed against the other side of his door so hard his teeth clicked together. Then nothing, only panting. Then a long, low howl that didn't sound like anybody's wife. When dawn came, he opened the door. The hallway looked like a crime scene. Scratches raked the paint. Blood smeared the floor in arcs that told a story he never wanted fully written. At the top of the stairs, near the front door, lay a corpse that hadn't been invited in. Long-limbed, thin-muzzled, fur the color of ash, broken neck, throat torn out. Mariel lay nearby, naked, shivering, half curled around his welcome mat. He wrapped her in every blanket they owned and carried her back to bed. After that, the conversations with her family changed. They stopped talking to him like an outsider, started including him in the grim meth of their lives, tracking moon phases, storm patterns, the strange upticks in missing animals around each cycle. They taught him to recognize claw marks from teeth marks, showed him the old journal where someone great something had written down the first version of the curse. "It always chooses a bride," it read in looping script. "The night she vows is the night it binds. She will howl for blood or for love. Whichever wins is what she becomes." Weeks turned into months. The bruises on his hand faded, but every now and then, when the moon was high and he'd been sitting too long in the dark, he felt a faint ache there, a phantom pressure, as if unseen teeth were testing the skin again. Sometimes, when he looked in the mirror, his eyes caught the light strangely. For a fraction of a second, he thought he saw the pupil stin, the gold creep in, the human soften. He told himself it was just his imagination. The brain is very good at wearing the shapes of its fears like masks. The first time he smelled blood before he saw it, he stopped laughing at himself. He'd been in town, buying groceries, nothing dramatic. The bell over the store door chimed as usual. The air inside smelled of old wood and coffee and cheap candy. He was halfway down the aisle when something sharp and metallic cut through it all, snapping his attention to the far cornered. An old man had dropped a jar. Glass and red sauce spattered everywhere. A woman rushed to help. Someone laughed. It was nothing, truly just dinner, ruined in a small, forgettable way. But Evan smelled it before anyone reacted. Heartbeat quick, pupils flaring. For one heartbeat, his jaw ached in a way that had nothing to do with tension. He left the cart and walked out without paying, hands shaking. Later, in bed, with Marielle's arm heavy across his chest, he traced the crescent of teeth on his hand and asked the question he'd been avoiding. Is it possible, he whispered into the dark, for the curse to leak without a bite? Beside him, she went still. My father thinks no, she said eventually. My mother says anything the moon touches, the moon keeps parteth. What do you think? He asked. I think I can smell you in the dark, she said, from rooms away. I think lately, when I'm gone, my dreams taste like your fear. I think the night you didn't open that door, something disappointed in both of us. That's not an answer, he said. Some questions don't get answers, she replied. They get watchers. You watch yourself, you watch the sky. You watch who looks away when you ask about the howl on your wedding night. He lay there listening to the distant bark of a dog, then another, then something that wasn't quite either. If I ever, he couldn't finish. If you ever change, she said for him, you won't be alone. That comforted and terrified him in equal measure. Years from Neff, you catch the right person at the right bar on the right bad weather night, you might hear a version of this story. People will argue about the details, about what exactly he saw, or what she became, or who really died on those full moon nights when the dogs went hoarse in Win Hollow. But certain lines stay the same. They always say the bride howled. They always say the groom stayed. And they always say that if you walk past the chapel on a clear night and look up at the circle window, sometimes you'll see not one, but two shapes moving there when the moon is full. If you're smart, you won't look up. If you're honest, the story reminds you of something you've already heard. Some cousin's cousin, some friend's neighbor, some article you scrolled past at 3 a.m. with all the lights off. If it does, you're not alone. Ask the locals about that night. They'll look away before answering. Ask yourself why you kept listening this long, even when you could have stopped. The night hasn't let you go yet. Stories like this leave marks. And whispering narratives has a way of finding the ones that don't heal right. If you've seen eyes change in moonlight, or heard a howl that didn't fit the throat you thought it came from, leave a single word below moon so the next poor soul scrolling in the dark sees the warning before it's too late. Let your comment be another scratch on the door before the next full moon finds them. And if you're still listening, still breathing a little too shallow in the dark, stay with the pack. Let whispering narratives be the voice that keeps you looking over your shoulder. Subscribe before the next full moon.